Hello and welcome to another episode of Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and this is the Earth911 podcast, and we have another innovator interview. We're very fortunate to be joined today by Jason Pelz, who is the Vice President of Recycling Projects for the Carton Council, which is an industry alliance around developing greater recyclability of cartons, as well as the Director of Circular Economy at TetraPak, a major packaging producer, make a lot of cartons. Jason, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks, Mitch.
Well, so now I wanted to get you on and talk about what's been going on with the Carton Council. You all launched in 2009, and you've made tremendous progress from 18% recyclability rates for cartons back in 2009 to, but we'll get to that in a moment, but you've made a ton of progress. Why is the Carton Council working so effectively to make changes in the way people see recycling?
It's a good question. I guess what I would say is this. I think the Carton Council works so well because you've got a group of stakeholders in the Carton Council who really can set aside the fact that, many of us are competitors, but when it comes to actually talking about making cartons more recyclable and solving a problem, we work very well together. I think that it's one of those things where the group sits together and the boat moves in one direction and we all row in one direction, and so we're successful.
That kind of collaboration is essential when you get back to end of life. It's fantastic to hear you say that, because we tend to just throw this stuff away and stop thinking about it. Companies encourage that for a long time, and this change is very welcome. Now, where are we at recycling levels in terms of cartons today?
So right now, we look at two things. The household access to carton recycling, which today is at about 61%, which is up from about 18% when this started in 2009. And as you had mentioned earlier, recycling rates for cartons are at about 17%, up from about 6% where they were at 2009. So we've made good progress over the last 10 years or so.
Now, one of the things that it's one of those legal niceties, but at 60% accessibility, you get to put the recycling label on the packages. That must have made a big difference in people's awareness. How did you see the effects of that take place?
It does. What we found through a number of studies that we've done and digging into information is that primarily people look at the pack, or the first place they look is on the pack. It's the easiest place to identify whether something is recyclable or not. So by being able to take away the qualified logo where it said only where facilities exist, to be able to then have it just say, please recycle, it made a big difference. And we expect that to continue to make a difference as we go into the future.
Now, where does the Carton Council want to get the recycling accessibility and recovery rates to in 2025?
So when we look at 2025, based on everything that we're seeing, including some of the difficulties going on right now in recycling, we have set a goal to achieve of 75% household access for carton recycling in the U.S. by 2025. And we'd like to see recycling rates at about 25% by 2025. So again, pretty aggressive. We do know it's going to be a challenge. It's going to take work. But again, we look at this as a marathon and not a sprint. And so we'll keep plugging at it.
Sustainability is never a finished job, that's for sure.
No, absolutely not.
Now, at 75%, do you see this starting to really coalesce into an industry that is based on recycling, where it is truly starting to reuse all the materials that have gone through the process? What does the industry start to look like when that happens?
I think what 75% does, and again, that's household access. I think it, for us, it's great. I mean, it's an achievement, but I don't think it changes a lot of what we do. And the reason is because, as I had said, we're thinking our recycling rate will be around 25%, which means you still have a pretty good size gap in some kind of participation, whether that's people really knowing they can put the cartons in the right bin, meaning the recycling bin, or is the performance at the MRF working as well as it can, that the cartons are all being captured correctly. So I think it's a great achievement, but kind of like it's even been up till now, I think it still is going to require us to still reinforce a lot of the messages we've had in the past, which is making sure people are prepared or are aware, for example, that they can recycle their cartons, and then also continuing to work with the MRFs, for example, to make sure they're doing the best job capturing those cartons for them to be recycled.
Now, so let's talk a little about the MRFs, or materials recovery facilities, for the folks who are listening and not in the industry. Those are the big centers that collect and sort all of our material. And you've written about the use of optical sorting to identify cartons within the stream that's passing along on the line.
Mm-hmm.
How is that going to change the way that we think about the convenience of being a recycler? And that really, for our readers, is a consistent theme. When does sustainability and convenience intersect to make this something that they can do easily rather than with a lot of instruction?
Well, I think what what automated sorting, and we'll call it automated sorting, because I think I've talked both about optical sorting, but also robotics, which includes a little bit of AI. But I think that automated sorting, it allows, I think, for greater participation from people, because, it allows for the potential to have, we have single stream recycling, for example, right now. So by having those things in the stream, the better the quality of the equipment is that can sort, I think that provides a convenience to the consumer where with less maybe effort at home, they can, put the stuff in the bin. But what I will say, and I think this is an important thing to distinguish, convenience and doing it right are two different things. And I think that this allows, for the ability for the consumer to put that which is recyclable in the bin. What it doesn't mean is that the consumer should put the wrong stuff in the bin. So, it's still going to require that the consumer puts what's truly trash in the trash bin, what's recyclable in the recycling bin. And then these types of equipment make things more efficient at the MRF level, which in turn, is good for the MRF, and it's good for everyone. It allows them to do things more efficiently, more economically, and at the same time produce better quality, which then, as we know, goes on to be able to be made in other products.
And it's a process of collaboration between everybody in the entire life cycle of that carton, obviously.
Agreed.
So let's talk about the different kinds of cartons. So this is kind of a pop quiz. So what do we do with milk cartons today?
Milk cartons, throw them in the recycling bin.
Cap on or cap off?
With cap on.
All righty. And now what about things like juice containers? What do we do with those?
Juice containers as well. Juice containers, the juice cartons absolutely should go in the recycling bin with cap on.
Cap on, okay. And what about things like soup or broth? Are those, do you need to rinse those or tear them open in order to rinse them?
No, you don't have to. I mean, listen, you should empty the contents. I don't believe that rinsing is necessary. I think most of the time at the consumer's house, they try to use all the products. Just make sure it's empty, as clean as possible.
Okay, great. Now, do you see a rise in cartons being used to deliver more beverages and foods?
I think we see it growing in certain sectors. I think we see cartons more prevalent throughout, and not going into each of the individual companies' specific, sales or market shares.
Sure,
I think
sure.
when you look on the shelves, you do see cartons more prevalent in a couple of different areas. I think you see them a little bit more prevalent in other dairy products or things like you see it pretty prevalent in coconut waters, and you see it in broth has become a big one. So I do see cartons growing.
The one that is interesting to me is the growth of wine in a carton or wine in a box. Is that, do you think, a trend that we're going to see take over across a lot of different alcoholic beverages?
I don't know. The one thing I will say is this: cartons can't handle carbonated beverages. So I think for the beer category, unless something major changes, that's not happening. But, it just depends. I think there are some advantages cartons offer, from a convenience standpoint. I think you also have the benefit that they don't necessarily break if you drop them. And look, I think people are becoming more aware of some of the sustainability benefits that cartons can bring, which is why we drive in Carton Council the end life part of the carton. And so they're making those choices. But look, as a carton manufacturer, we'd love to see it.
So the other end of the calculation here is the number of carton recycling facilities in the United States. And there's only about a half dozen right now, although they're doing some really interesting things, like even producing enamel wallware, or the kinds of tiling that you would use to redecorate a very expensive kitchen. But there aren't a whole lot of them. What will take us to that level of local recycling of carton materials that will reduce the transportation overhead that also adds to the carbon load?
Yeah, so I think it's two things. having come from the recycling industry with my
Mhm.
background, I always think that export will play a part in recycling. And I say that because I think it's a global economy. Having
Mhm.
said that, when you talk specifically, let's say in the US and Canada, I do see increased interest in the cartons and what they have to offer. And what'll bring it about is a couple of things. I think the more we as Carton Council, one of our missions is to work with those end markets to explain what benefits they could gain by using cartons.
Mhm.
Whether it's for the fiber, whether it's for the poly and polyaluminum, or whether it's for the whole carton at once, that's part of our job. But I also think you're beginning to see people actually see that there is a benefit. And I think, it's kind of one of those deals that as people try it and begin to run the material and say, oh, this actually has got some great value for us, we're going to see that grow. And I think that, there are certain commodities that you see potentially shrinking in volumes as things change. We've seen newspapers and other grades start to shrink because there's less readership or things like
Sure.
that. So fibers being a carton-based product have the potential maybe to substitute where some of those others are going. So I think it's going to be a combination of all of that. And again, it's going to require also, a little bit of creativity too, talking to some of these end markets and figuring out how maybe it can fit within their system, which is something we're engaged with all the time.
So as we, as consumers, think about how we spend money in order to encourage a recycled product and packaging, what is the best way for a consumer to communicate to the maker of the beverage or the food that they're purchasing that they really want this to be taken care of at the end of life and recycled responsibly?
That's an interesting question. I think, look, part of it is done simply by the consumer choosing what they want to buy.
Mhm.
So the more knowledge they have in the product, I think, will dictate what their purchasing patterns are, which listen, over time is going to put pressure back on the brand and then back on that packaging supplier as well. So I think that's part of what's done. I think the other thing they can do is, and we see this is they can, communicate with us, whether it be the
Mhm.
packaging supplier, the brand, letting them know, what they feel is important. I think that input is important for us to receive.
Well, and our readers want to share that with you, so I'll make sure that they're aware of that. Now, my last question is, where do you see food packaging in 10 years? We're about to enter the 2020s, and we know that 2030 is roughly the time period where we need to have achieved significant carbon reduction in order to prevent more than 2 degrees centigrade warming. Where's food packaging and delivery look? Where is it in 2030 in your thinking?
Listen, I think like any kind of packaging, it's going to have to improve, from a sustainability standpoint. And I think that you have some willing players in the business who are willing to make that happen. I think that whether it's our cartons or whether it's cups or whether it's takeout containers or whatever, I think that each of the individual sectors are going to have to really work on things to make them more sustainable. And whether that is improving the end of life, improving what goes into them, improving how they're distributed, I think that, again, I think it's a work in progress. So to say to you, where we'll be in 2030, I don't know specifically, but I sure hope we're better. And that's the commitments, that we as a group in Carton Council are making. And I think if you ask each of the individual companies, they'd say the same thing, that each one of them is looking to see how to make better what we already think is a pretty good product.
Now, I think that's a perfectly reasonable answer, but let's get a little more specific. Do you see, what are the challenges for carton manufacturing over the next 10 years where you see the most opportunity for improvement?
Oh, that's a good one. And I think that one becomes a little bit tough because some of it becomes proprietary. This is where maybe there's a divergence in what, maybe we as TetraPak might be looking at versus what some of the other folks are doing.
Sure.
So I guess my answer would be, again, it's the more of the general thing. I think everybody's going to do it, but I think we're going to have to be, I think that we're going to have to make sure that our cartons are lower in carbon footprint.
Okay.
That they've got a strong end of life story, that they're able to be recycled very widely. Those would be, I guess, the top line things that I would say.
Do you think that there's progress to be made in lightening the materials?
I think it depends. And again, that goes back into that proprietary piece, but I think the one thing that has to be taken into consideration, and I don't think I'd be speaking out of character for any of the folks, it's also making sure there's that balance that, whether it's lightweighting or not, you don't want to ever put in at risk what's inside the package. And so I think
Right.
that that's something that would have to be taken into consideration, that you'd never want to risk, whether it's the milk or the juice or the whatever that's inside. You don't want to do something to the package which then makes that become a problem.
Sure. Food safety is always going to be the number one concern.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. Well, hey, Jason, thank you very much for taking the time to bring us up to date on what's going on with carton technology. We really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure. This was great. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're welcome. Folks, that's Jason Pelz. He's the Vice President of Recycling Projects for the Carton Council and Director of Circular Economy Efforts at TetraPak. This is Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear, and we'll be back with another episode soon. This is Mitch Ratcliffe. Have a great afternoon, folks.